your early influences and your early years? What were your aspirations? What were your ambitions? And what were your ideas then?
No, actually, like I'm a chartered accountant.
Okay.
I worked for SB Memoria in Calcutta.
Okay.
And then moved to Chennai. He was working for British Oxygen. And we always had a dream to come back to Chennai and start something.
Okay. But going further back to your childhood, I mean, what were the circumstances in which you grew up, and did you have entrepreneurial aspirations right from then, or when did the idea just?
I don't know when the idea honestly came.
Okay.
But yeah, my dad used to work for the railways, so we were a nomadic family in that sense, moving from one place to another place. And so I grew up in Chennai, and then in Calcutta I studied, and then moved to Nagpur and did my CA there.
Okay.
And yeah, initially I think I wanted to work for a company. And so entrepreneurship as such, I don't think so was there in my mind.
Those greatness thrust on her kind of. That was the same. Yeah, I used to have very deep. I am from a village near Sivakasi. Vilambati is my village. Very proud about my village. It's a village where entrepreneurship is in the air. And you are truly respected if you are on your own. Even if you earn 1 lakh a month salary, I mean, you're still not very respected. I think it's very implicitly that value is there in that Sivakasi belt. And I think that was very deep within. My grandfather was a role model for me. My father was a worker in a match factory. To that extent, I can say I'm first generation. But my mother's father, who actually brought me up, my mother's father was a phenomenal entrepreneur in my view. He used to be a cook. He was the first generation by himself. He was a cook to one famous doctor in Chennai. And after Dr. Santosham got into politics, I think he relieved his cook with 5,000 rupees at that time. And he went with that money to start something in Sivakasi, which is his original place. And I think I've seen him start off. My father passed away fairly early, 3 months since I was born. So my mother came to her place. That's how I landed in Vilambati. So as a 3-month-old kid. So they named that factory as Pandiraj Matchworks in my name. So that was the first entrepreneurial thing I've seen, without my major contribution to it. I used to be there, we all of us work in these so-called tiny sectors of Sivakasi. So I used to always have that in the blood, so to speak. But then, I mean, as the day's thing will be, we all went to engineering. So PSG Tech and XLR, MBA I did, and HR. Still remember the day when there was a lady called Nilima Acharji, who was a doyen in IR, who used to ask this question, why do you want to be on your own after doing IR? Nobody becomes on their own once they study IR and W. That's what that course used to be known as in those days. I kept on saying, I want to study psychology and I want to be on my own. So I want to do IR, is what I kept saying. Much later...
IR is industrial relations.
Industrial relations. So much later, my batch of 54 HR guys and 54 BM guys who passed out of Excel in that year, hardly 9 out of the 54 BM guys are entrepreneurs, while almost 20 of us in HR became entrepreneurs. I think life changed quite a bit around all of us. But I had a natural instinct to do something on my own. But after I started working, as she said, VOC, and then that was when we got married. We sort of, I had a 3-year stint with V. Krishnamurthy, Dr. V. Krishnamurthy, who was running a clutch of companies in Chennai, and that was the time anything non-technical used to be given to me. I started as this head of HR and management services, which basically meant finance, marketing, everything at that point. It was a huge exposure for me as a 29-year-old to work with VK, and I was having Idea, Mascon, many companies, Kaveri Sugars. You get into a train and go land in Petavaithalai, do a union negotiation, come back and do a meeting with SAP for Mascon to tie up a deal, and then fly to Muscat to sell energy meet. You almost sound like Kamal Haasan in one of those movies, Engeyum Eppodum, he'll say. It's almost like that, the intense 2.5, 3-year period used to be. And that was
you started MOFA in which year?
August 15th. We are completing 20 years today.
20 years today.
So August 15th, 1992 is when we started.
So this is just about a year after liberalization, I guess. So
it was not liberalized yet.
Yeah.
It was, we were pledging gold at that time. That was the exact date when the gold pledging was happening, and liberalization happened much later.
So what was, the spark for MOFA? I mean, what was going on around that time that...
There were push factors, pull factors, trigger factors, as we always say in recruitment. So like the push factor was always there. There was a basic orientation was there. Pull factor was, at that time, things were really, there was a huge opportunity, which we could see. Always reiterate this episode where I saw one oil well going on fire in Rava oil fields of Andhra, as it used to in those days. And there was an Australian HR company, staffing company, which was brought to service that requirement by the bluest of blue chips in India. So there were about 34, 35 guys who were brought in from different parts of the world to quench the oil well fires. And 31 of them were Indian origin. They came from all over the place, Middle East, Southeast Asia, UK, and US. But what was common thread was to get 35 people, out of which a large majority were Indian origin. This company pocketed a neat $1 million plus. And the largest Indian HR company at that time, which had multiple branches and everything, their entire revenue for that year was less than $1 million. And they were not even called to bid for this work. And that struck a very, very strong card, call it nationalistic, call it a business trigger or whatever. Then I researched into it. At that time, BK had given me the opportunity to set up an operation in Singapore. And I was seeing there many companies in this business of expertise marketing, as we called that business at that time. So that was one of the great pulls where I saw an opportunity out there, and we can create something. And we figured out many differences between the way these companies operate globally. We saw with the Indian placement agencies, which is what the companies used to be known at that time. So that was a pull factor. There was also a trigger factor where both of us were supposed to be in Singapore working for one of the ventures created by Dr. V. Krishnamurthy. And as it happened, due to political reasons, he got arrested. And no fund movement could happen to Singapore. So suddenly there was a trigger at that moment where we had to be on our own, fend for ourselves. So I just came back and started it. Lata at that time had set up a all-woman CA firm, Revati and Lata Chartered Accountants. So, but we never believed in heart being taken care by somebody and somebody taking risk and all that. And we just chucked and went on our own. By and large, there was nothing to fear. We didn't have much money at that time. We had only my PF money, 60,000 rupees. Not a great deal, because when I got married to her, we blew up money quite a bit, 5 marriages, and I was trying to impress my hard-won love, and I was working in Calcutta, we were honeymooning in somewhere else, and my first month's salary after marriage was some minus 2,000 rupees. So we were fairly deep in debt, so we didn't have much money, so started with the PF money only.
So one interesting thing you said was that you actually researched the opportunity fairly well before you jumped in. Many entrepreneurs go through this dilemma. Do I spend a lot of time researching it, or do I just go with my gut and jump in?
Research, intuitive research, I would say, not a formal research. Surely we didn't hire a market research agency or anything. We went around seeing some of these companies in Singapore, how they That was around the time when Idea and Echo, two companies were ruling the roost with manpower and all that. Classic statements got made at that time that we are not in staffing services, we are in financial services, justifying some of the famous mergers which were happening around the world at that point in time. I think the stint with VK opened my mind and the window to the world. I used to travel to 14, 15 countries at that time to sell different things, but we also had a taste of what it means to depute people across borders. There was a time when the deputation business I was running was earning more money than the detail engineering business. So he asked me to just handle this because it became a powerful engine for cash flows. So I just kind of had a good exposure to sending people overseas when I was working for VK. And that was a good base which I had. Intuitively, we knew there's a certain thing which can be created. And then we set sails. Mofa was born on this day 20 years back with an ad which we crafted and which came on that day. Let's engineer your future overseas. That's what it said.
Okay.
And we were known initial period as the coffee company. Anybody who comes in can have we used to innovate small cups of coffees and people can just have a cup of coffee and have a chat with the managing director or the director. We were the two people who were there at that time. Then many people started coming, but the initial period, that was the startup. And by and large, we always lived beyond our means. I mean, honestly, I think any traditional wisdom would say don't go around taking 10 people when you start a company. End of the first year, we were about 10 people. We were 7.5 months into the beginning, and we did recruitment in style. I mean, we went to campuses and picked up people, took them to Sheraton, took them to Fisherman's Cove and did a one-day workshop with them. The shortlisted 30 people. And without anything else, we have planted an idea. These guys are going to sit in the HR group. So it's fine. We'll give them a one-day exposure to a personal growth lab kind of a thing. So we always tried living, or let me put it, not living beyond means, where our aspirations were ahead of our resources.
Okay.
That's a Prahlad way of putting the same thing.
That's a very nicely put statement.
That's,
How did you complement and supplement, each other in your, work?
I managed the corporate affairs, so to say, finance, HR, legal, all that. And of course, he managed the entire operations and marketing.
No, I earn and she spend, that's it. I mean, there's very, basically
no, but for 20 years, like if this has happened, then you can see that it has borne fruit.
No. For a long time, I used to have this norm, I will not sign a check.
So she used to spend very, very sparingly, I guess, so that you were able to actually...
Actually not so. He's quite a, liberal person from the point of view of doing this. And the struggles with the banks and all that initial days. Now I think entrepreneurs are starting much better with the world of VCs and early investors, late investors and everything. Those days I think it was not there. I still remember the day in 1999 towards the end where Venkat used to bring one very good-looking lady into our office and started talking about wife is not Kamala. So a very good-looking lady. She used to work for a venture capital and started talking about what does this idea of venture capital and all that stuff. First person to introduce us that there are other ways of getting money other than...
Initially, we struggled a lot in terms of funds as such because banks never funded us. In the concept of overdraft for a HR company was not something which
you don't have any assets.
We didn't have, so whatever we had, anytime we go to a bank, they'll ask for collateral. Okay, and I still remember a nationalized bank. When I went, they had some long forms, I filled up everything, I answered the bank manager 100 questions he asked me about HR and what is it. People first never understood what is HR and HR services. At the end of it, he told me even this tandem committee report which says like banks can lend for buying bullocks, but there's nothing which says we can...
Buffaloes. You're growing old. See, the classic statement at that time was, look, instead of 20 MBAs that you perpetually had, if you have 20 buffaloes, tandem committee allows me to lend you a certain amount of money, 10 lakhs or whatever.
Yeah.
But because, and he had a good reason for it, you can peg a buffalo to a
It will
place.
stay with you. They won't run away. Your people will run away.
Run away.
So where
You'll
is
show
my
me today.
collateral in the entire thing?
You'll show me today, you won't
So
show me
it's-
tomorrow.
Yeah, it's
But a great feeling when the same Canara Bank came back to invest. Even today we hold a record with Can Ventures for having the highest premium. We have at some point in time they came back to take, they were our third investors.
Okay.
At a point.
Yeah, we'll come back to funding a little later.
Yeah.
In terms of the way in which you had envisaged the business, I mean, did it actually turn out that way in the first couple of years, or was it very different?
As I said, there were trigger factors for us to start. Okay, we just started. And one thing we very, very strongly believe that we'll create an organization which will be $1 billion company. When you come into at that time, $1 billion conversion, most people never used to know. This was largely pre-liberalization. Whenever I go to a campus, the first question I'll always ask is, how many people know what is $1 billion in rupee crores? And half the answers will be wrong. Okay, because those days it was largely India is India. I mean, we don't connect a great deal with the rest of the world. MBA students, MSW students, MSW chance they will never just not answer this. Okay, and I used to always ask this proudly, and then we will be a $1 billion company by 2025. That's what we used to say, and emerge as the world's most respected HR service provider, and that happened much early. And also anchored on 4 values, which we always used to very religiously repeat: growth, diversity, transparency, and
integrity.
So that's something which we always used to have. And this whiteboard we also have in our office, transparently used to document everybody's performance. Everybody else needs to know that, and we used to have a point system which measures how much we will earn, everybody in the company. Every month we used to have a system of recording them. I think we were fairly system oriented, I think, though people came in different shapes and sizes. One of our early chairmen used to talk about largely a bunch of misfits came and joined us. Different people from different streams. There was, someone who was a market research enumerator, had a long break, came, joined us and co-created Bafwa. There's another guy from an MBA institute, fresh from campus, came, made it his home. I think there's one thing which happened very right, even in the earlier stages, is anybody who came in to co-create, not to earn a living. And there was another classmate of mine who went into sannyas after MBA with 5 years of working in marketing. Those were hard days of marketing. So he actually left and went and took sannyas and came back after some 5 years recalibrating himself into the thing. So people came from very different streams, and each one was exciting, and each one actually spread anchors. See, the Bafwa very quickly moved beyond the 2 of us to many people who could peg themselves, their careers into the company. I think there's one thing I have to distill out. This is something which happened right, especially in the first 8 years.
But how did you actually, persuade people to come and join you? I mean, what was the pitch that you made to them in those days?
See, HR was not an industry in that sense. So there was no so much of competition from where we could really pick up. So people came, as you said, from different fields. And I think like somebody who had a passion to really, walk this path with us that way. I think transparency was a value. So I think everything was shared. I mean, we started in a very small place, in a place called Jayalakshmipuram in Nungambakkam. So people, when they walked in, they knew they had to work there. Okay, there was no AC there, and it was an ordinary small building. So, but yes, as you said, like, we had a vision, mission, values worked out,
But
even in the first year.
Okay, but did you advertise to get people, or how did you manage to reach out to people and persuade them to come and join you as a small company in a space which was not very well known, and it must
Right
have been
from
quite,
93, we went to the campuses.
Okay.
Like we visited, we used to initially Pondicherry, all the good campuses we used to go to, talk to the students. That
No,
way.
IMA, we were a day one campus. At some point, we kept on raising the bar, so to speak. And there was a time we were competing with our clients to get that number one, day one slot or whatever. Starting with Madras School of Social Work, going up to IMA.
In fact, people used to say, like, it's funny, why do you want to recruit so many freshers, MBAs especially, and, when by and large, 3 years, 4 years, they leave you. And so we used to always feel, but still, that freshness, the uniqueness which they used to bring, we used to really,
We
I
always used to
find
call
it
them the brand
interesting.
ambassadors, the guys who leave us, the girls who leave us. When they go, they are brand ambassadors. We used to call them alumni. If today there are 8 CEOs who have gone out of MAFA, who are going around everywhere, Kelly's is headed by our guy, ADP is headed by our guy, Randstad, of course, is headed by our MAFA alumni. So that's something we're very proud of. In some manner, immodestly speaking, we could well be the HLL of the staffing industry, Unilever of the staffing industry. We've created so many people who have gone in. But I think it's important from the beginning we recognize them. Alumni, they oftentimes became our shareholders. Small shares given to 276 people. And there was no predetermined number. It's just every year, okay, we can take equity, take enough which we can service the equity with 20% dividend. We were religiously giving 20% dividend. And we didn't have any major restrictions as to who will get our shareholder. It could be someone who worked with me in the match factories of Sivagasi and Vilambati in the early days, for whom 3,000, 4,000 rupees was all her life savings. There are people like that who park their funds. There are people who are my classmates from PSG, Tech, XLRI. Some of them are our own members, people who worked with us, co-created MAFA. Some clients whom we have challenged, will place this position. If we do it, invest in my company kind of a thing. There was one client I would particularly be impressed. This client, we placed about 2 CEOs and they gave around 17 lakhs, which we took as equity. Of course, they got 4 crores after in a few years, but it was such a huge feeling at that time that someone of that stature could invest 17 lakhs into the company. So we converted into public limited fairly early. 96 itself we became. Within 4 years, we converted into a public limited. The moment we hit our first 1 crore, we did a public limited
This was a
conversion.
very unusual funding model for the time, I would say, to take lots of
small
amounts from a wide number of investors, also from a wide variety of backgrounds, not only from
See, our AGMs used to be like a mela. Every year rigorously we used to do our AGMs, and people from extremely diverse backgrounds used to come. And this was a great listening session, learning session for us. People giving their views as to what should happen, what should you do, what's happening around us. We used to have good 2 hours, 2.5 hours AGM in the early period. We can split ourselves into 5 phases. The first phase is where pure entrepreneurial growth, raise equity from small people. At that time, there was not even a concept of venture capital, that someone will come, give you money and want an exit kind of a thing. That was an idea Venkat planted with that good-looking lady I spoke about. Till then, there was no concept. And I had another fairly life-changing experience. 2 months I spent in US. Both of us spent to go to US on a Eisenhower Fellowship.
Which year would this be?
2000.
Okay.
2000. At the peak of, we just taken our first 1 crore of venture capital from a company called Usha Martin Ventures. The good-looking lady never gave us money. She, introduces the concept, but after that, Venkat coordinated the other people. And she was running one of the very interesting venture capital companies, which had invested in these small companies. They were almost like an early investor model. CDC is the company. I don't know in what form it exists now, but they had kind of come and spoken to us about this idea that someone will give money to us, and we can buy them back if we choose to, or give them an exit through a public issue. At that time, actually, my dream was a public issue. That was our collective dream, and that we never went in the first phase of first avatar of Mafia is a pity. But that was actually what I had in mind. 276 people, we'll widen to 1,000 people kind of a thing, which we could have easily. Till the time the VCs came. Okay, the VCs didn't come alone, unfortunately. So we had the first VC who gave us 1 crore, a client of us, Usha Martin. And within a week, Prashant Jawar, brought his co-brother, who was at that time the third richest Indian in the world, Lord Bagri, who was running this company called Medtist. It was known as the Copper King. And 1 hour call and you have 1 crore remittance happen. It was a dream run. Because the first 8 years, all that we have done was 10 rupee share at 10 rupee, 10 rupee share at 15 rupee, 10 rupee share at 20, 10 rupee share at 25 rupees.
So these 250 plus, investors had already come in by then.
Yeah, 276 of them had come. And then suddenly one fine day, we thought, we'll change the world. All of us wanted to. The .com happened at that time. So we'll change the business model from client centricity to candidate centricity. From bud to blossom was the punchline, and from birth to graveyard of human being will offer services kind of a thing. And all that was happening. And the only thing we didn't realize was internet penetration was still 1.5%, which we didn't realize, unfortunately, in all our enthusiasm. And we went out and took the money. The first was Prashant Jawar, second was Medtist, Lord Bagri, and over a period, we also had a term sheet at that time from a very large bank. And they had committed a very good valuation at that point in time. Unfortunately, they never invested. They suddenly came up with a call between Hong Kong and London and some other place in US, and they said, look, .com are going to collapse. We heard that good story when I was sitting in my Eisenhower fellowship, studying the so-called venture capital industry. She was studying that and I was studying the HR services industry. And it was a shock to us. And when we came back, things had collapsed. And companies which after us started taking funding, one by one started dying, because most of them blown up money in the branding eyeball chase at that time. So I've got so many eyeballs, but how much money you make, not much kind of a face that face was. And
yeah, I know that only too well with our own experience.
That's right. So, that was the time. Thankfully, I think her conservativeness helped quite a bit. She refused to spend, unfortunately, at that point in time. She just ensured that half of the money remained in bank. And
no,
the rest
but by
of
the
half.
time we really realized, I think our model should be different. I think this click and mortar is not something which we should really go in for, but the brick and mortar types. So I think so quickly, I think we did spend by the time some money. We set up an office, had a lot of these technical people coming in, and websites getting designed and all that. But then quickly realized, I don't think so. We should really move ahead. So half the money was spent. He spent it. That is half the money. And
We always had powerful punchlines, yeah. So it was,
And then, of course,
new
like
meanings in HR emerged at that time as a punchline. It was known all over the world. We quietly went and set up Singapore office, Dubai office. We set up all over the country. We experimented with franchising HR services, went into tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 locations. All that happened with that money. It's not like, we didn't make great revenue during that 2-year period. But we quickly reworked our model. 6 times we rewrote the business plan. And kind of went back to a client-centric mode where we don't charge the candidate but charge the clients kind of a thing. Yeah, but that 2 years meant a lot of amortization pushed into the balance sheet, because we also had this lock-in of having committed 20% dividend to our people, and add to the misery, we ended up giving a lot of bonus issues. We had 3 bonus issues.
But then if you had been committing 20% dividend, so you must have been profitable right through from the beginning?
Okay, profits. We never were a highly profit-making company, unfortunately.
But we were
certainly
making
profitable,
profits.
yeah.
Yeah, we were making profits.
Okay.
You are making enough profit to service at 20%, a small equity. Our equity was not very high. Yeah.
So most of the entrepreneurs go through this dilemma of whether they should chase growth or whether they should chase profitability. So in a sense, you managed to pull off both, have the best of both worlds, I'd say.
We would have loved to do the profitability bit a lot more. I think we did the growth bit quite a bit in that sense. But I think there was a lot of diversity in our DNA. And from the day one, probably like in terms of the offerings, in terms of the people, in terms of setting up different locations. I think this was something like which I think excited us also, and probably it helped us at that point of time.
See, one construct I always, later thoughts. If we have to retrofit my live data with hindsight. See, I think there's a scale, scope, and depth. All three elements play a role. And I think it's like a dance. Business, as I experienced, is more like a dance. You can never be static. You can never be full of inertia. You need to keep dancing along these three dimensions. I think in Marfa, scale was important because you just don't get noticed. We were the pioneers, first company to draw equity from a strategic investor at a point. And I think it's primarily because we could cross 100 crore at a certain point. This became an industry. So I was very scale obsessed from the beginning. And scope to me was a means to get scale. Okay, scope of what all you will do, whether you will be in the HR consulting, whether you will be into outsourcing, whether you will be into M&A related the due diligence part, or whether you will get into payroll processing, whether you will get into different aspects of HR, staffing, distinction between executive search and permanent recruitment and all that. 8 different services we were offering. That's all widening the scope. Widening the scope. Geographically, we know expand into any place where cross-border movements can happen for Indians. We mapped about 26 countries. If I had gone in the normal course, probably would have set up offices in 26 countries. We did 14 actually at some point. So that was one other model which was working, which geographical reach, allowing a certain scale, scope expansion, allowing a certain scale, depth, the third dimension, which is what she calls profitability, is one of the dimensions, branding is another dimension, and any other, the people depth that we carry, what you call as the co-creators, their institutional attachments and all that. These are all to me depth indicators. I think we got the people-based depth quite well. I don't think we got the profitability right because of there was always a new birth. It's like a lady who always is giving birth every year to a new business, a new person. Obviously, it's not going to be, we never had much of a time to stabilize many businesses. It just was born. And
but you are investing your profits into growing
we
scope
got,
rather than, taking in equity or...
no, we were taking equity.
Okay.
Debt also we were taking.
Okay.
Though, we couldn't get much debt from the banking sector, so the highest OD we must have had would have been what, 25 lakhs, 30 lakhs or whatever in the phase 1. The phase 2, moment the VCs came in, you had the VC money to spend.
Okay.
So that was about 3.5 years. And at the end of that, 2004 May, we signed up with VDR. We had 3 options. Randstad said, why on earth we'll go to India? They were the 4th. 3rd was VDR. The 2nd was Manpower. The 1st was Adecco. We had offers from all of them. But VDR's model interested me because they defined themselves as a confederation of entrepreneurs. They said, you need to have a minimum equity and you will run the company with your own brand and you can go to any country and set up operations. So it was like a dream come true. That was the inflection point, call it if you like, a decision point which lasted for over a month, where our dream of doing a public issue, where all these 276 investors would have been an asset, build that kind of a thing, versus to do a strategic investor coming in kind of a thing. That was a decision which we took based on 2-3 reasons, some personal, deeply personal. By that time I had looked at a political career and entry into that kind of a thing. By that time, the markets had tanked hugely. If you still remember that 2004 when they fell to 3,000, Sensex falling to 3,000, communists pulling support and all that stuff. So I think somewhere that was a decision which I've always again and again reflected. Was it right? Was it right? Was it right? Kind of a question. Yeah, we went ahead. VDR came in, acquired all these 276 small investors, acquired the 3 VCs. The same bankers who used to look at us, many levels low, suddenly she became a hot cake. Everybody wanted to come and give us a loan when we needed least loan at that point in time. So that's a thrill of a certain kind. And we expanded wildly overseas. 7 offices in Middle East, 6 offices in Southeast Asia, 3 offices in US, go to China, go to everywhere. That dream we started living. There's 26 countries where Indian expertise is sought and returning Indians can be of significance. We went in hugely in that particular thing. But then as it happened, 3 years later, Videor got acquired by Randstad, which is a one company, one culture, one brand kind of a company. While Videor had this many flowers bloom kind of a model, 155 brands they had in 51 countries. Okay, from there it changed. So then at that point in time, I ran the company for about 2.5 years. But then we thought we need to have the brand back for that to grow, because they were very clear. So they moved to Maufa Randstad, and then they were clearly wanting to have one brand around the world. So that led to my exit, our exit. And I continue as the chairman of Randstad India Limited. I'm happy to see them hold the team intact and grow and remain as number one in India. So that's a pleasure to watch. It's almost like your creation is proven, like the daughter-in-law, being recognized by the mother-in-law out there kind of a thing. How the mother will feel, that's the kind of feeling we have. But now we have started the version 6, actually version 6 of Maufa, which is into a very new phase of consulting, education, and research and analytics. These are the 3 businesses where whatever gets linked by insights, maybe today our urge is to create that lost 5th part of the big 5, which should emerge from India.
So what is the opportunity you're seeing now for the new business in your second innings?
See, I used to be associated very closely initially with ISP. I saw the struggle that they had to get this triangle right. See, if you want to go to FT 500, create an institution which is part of FT 100, the business schools, the evaluation largely depends on how this triad works. This triad of consulting, research, and management education. The consultant teaches, the teacher researches, the researcher consults, kind of a triangle. It's very rare for anybody to get it right. That's a challenge which we are taking on. I think it's the MBA school will be central to our work. We will create offices in 8 locations around the country, the same 8 which anchored the earlier Maufa, the Chennai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, the Bombay, Pune, Ahmedabad, the Delhi and Calcutta kind of a thing. I'll be a lot more India-centric this time than in my earlier avatar. I think in the earlier period, we went to overseas a little faster than we should have gone, in my view. In that model, the depth I needed was far, far higher. It couldn't have been powered by the internal generation of the money. So we ended up borrowing hugely and all that stuff. So that, I think, was a mistake in the first avatar. In this avatar, we'll be largely working with our own funds. I don't intend to leverage on debt a great deal. I like to use acquisitions a lot more, like the banks got rolled up in US to create an organization. We are looking at mid-sized small companies in the business consulting space, analytics space, to roll up and create a larger capacity. Like the AccessB acquisition was in that direction. I think we believe that over a 10-year period, we could create a big 5 company from India in the consulting space, but with a deep anchor in research and education.
So that's $1 billion in 10 years now?
I think it's possible. Yeah, if we do what we set out to do, it should happen. And it is interesting, I see the same adrenaline flow or whatever. There's no major difference. Yeah, except that those 10 guys who, co-created Maufa are not with us, which is a bit of I can't take them from Randstad. And I have a commitment. I have a sacred commitment, which I will honor. But yeah, there are new people we are finding. People are coming in the well-set minds, and the very strong people who are coming in with their own set things. There was a time I could take my two-wheeler and get the colleague of mine to sit behind me and teach as we drive down the Mount Road or in Hyderabad or wherever. I used to love doing that. And I think many of my good learnings have happened at that time. Good teachings have happened at that time. So here it can't be that way. The guy joins, he comes in a BMW to join me as a so I don't think I have that pleasure and luxury of, the wind whizzing past you kind of a thing. Yeah, so it's a different challenge, but yeah, if you don't make it that way, it will be not a...
In terms of marketing, I think the, whole idea of the name itself, that must have been when your marketing, idea must have started. So what was the marketing thinking in your first avatar itself, right from the beginning?
The name as such, like, I don't know, there's no research behind this name, Mafia or anything like that. It's just that when we started, like, we wanted to sound global. And right from day one, we wanted to create a large organization. And at the time when we started in 92, somewhere like we thought this recruitment as such, a lot of people used to take money from the candidates. So we thought it was very unprofessional. So we wanted to create a real professional organization. And when this word Mafia, which means my word, I came across, I thought like somewhere it symbolized trust to us. And so we said like, it sounds good. And so that's how the Mafia name came.
And also in the oil and gas industry, it connotes a contract. Often I've heard the term from these French colleagues whom I used to interact during the VK's time, especially in Singapore and all that. They always used to come up with Mafia. They used to almost use it like the Inshallah of Middle East. They keep throwing that Mafia name. And
it's basically an exclamation in French. It's my word, but it means that way.
Yeah.
I actually think we gave meaning a little differently in India. Even now, but one good thing in that is any French company I approach, we used to have 100% conversion. They will invariably sign it. It appeals to their parochial tendencies in one level, but it also, somebody is giving meaning, a very new meaning to what they always thought was a slightly derogatory kind of term that they use in their own language. So we took it and lent a meaning of trust to it. And that was a good thing. Yeah, it also offered us a way to explain what we stand for. When we go and meet a client, invariably the pronunciation used to be difficult, ranging from Mafia
to Mafia.
Especially when you go and ask for our money. Those days people were not comfortable giving advance to a recruitment company and all. Why advance and things like that. So they used to very deliberately call us mafias. The mafias have come and pester us like, our whiteboard was very hugely tilted towards collections. So people used to pester the clients. So Mafia name stuck to us a little hugely. So that's the name story.
Okay. But in terms of having started from Chennai as a HR services company, you were able to quickly establish your name in the overseas markets, I guess, where it didn't matter where you were from, whether from Chennai or anywhere else in India. But as Arun was saying, to be known nationally, how did you come to brand
There were
yourself?
big breaks which we had. I think I must say, like the Apple was one of the first breaks where the entire recruitment of Apple computers when they came into India, ADI, their development center, plus the Apple computers was with us.
How did you land the deal?
It's very interesting, very intriguing. I still can't figure out how, but those days Noble House used to be the big thing of professional recruitment. They were positioning themselves that way and they were very large. And I think we got the mandate within 2 years of our starting. 94 we got, and I think they were looking at someone who could give good time for their assignment. And I think I offered that. I literally was handling the assignment myself, meeting all the key people, much before this distinction of executive search and permanent recruitment.
But how did you know they were coming in? How did you land that deal?
There was a friend who was working in Wipro at that time, the same N. Krishna Kumar, who is now in Mindtree. He was handling the Apple dealership, what they call Apple Channel, Wipro used to be, and he referred us at that time, and we went and presented. We got shortlisted to be one of the 3 companies, and I think somewhere emotionally, I think myself and the CEO who came to India hit out very well, and some of the things, I think he believed that we were a simple kind of a company compared to a fairly, as he later revealed to me, they sounded very big is the kind of feeling that he had about the other companies. And we were small, and we just simply said, look, we'll give it all we have kind of a thing. And we got the mandate, and we sustained the mandate. And more importantly, it started with some 10 lakhs of advertisements. So everywhere Morpha was there, and every news, Times of India, we had a half-page ad, which was there, flashed all over the place. And we had anybody and everybody in the IT industry who was applying to us, and other industries. They drew from FMCG, drew from retail, and many other industries. So that actually also gave us a big head start. And I think we had excellent entry into Middle East at that time. From the oil and gas industry, Mott MacDonald, the earlier version of Mott MacDonald, Eubank Rees. We had clients who were very deep with us. And that was very important. Personalized service from the very beginning. We used to have this 48 hours response for a CV in those days. All that was a refreshing contrast with what other companies were doing at that time. We were experimenting with new models. I still remember the day I concocted this term called turnkey recruitment. Because I came from the project space. So we put this together, and we started with Monsanto at that time, where they used to come from 3 different countries, the people to interview. Idea of separating critical attributes, getting a separate statement. I think that's somewhere the HR component which we brought in to the staffing business helped, in my view. And the same Monsanto became very large. The entire deputation business, they gave us around 500 people whom we were deputing to them. Then there was a phase of HSBC entry, exclusively recruiting for HSBC close to 16,000-17,000 people in India. I think by this time the India scenes had started, back to Bharat scenes had started, mass recruitment, handling it well. We had a technology of doing that, the turnkey recruitment model, which we rechristened as RPO and all that. So I think to me, we were very open to create newer vehicles in tune with what the client was needing at different points in time. I think that was another reason to succeed. And I think in terms of ownership flexibilities, which allowed people to co-create a lot more into the company, and not being very scared of scale. I mean, we did 1,200 crores in terms of scale, if you were to look at. Some businesses which are very scale intensive can be very scary. To do a salary disbursement of close to 100 crores in a month. There were many people who were very scared of doing this. What kind of risks you're undertaking? What if your key client goes bust? We used to have one account, 5,000 deputies. Okay, what will happen? Isn't it too, you're making it very vulnerable and things like that? Yeah, I think we were gutsy or we were foolhardy, as you can look at from 2 different points of view. But I think depth was becoming more and more important. So this idea of fund infusion, strategic investment, sovereign guarantees, all that became actually important as we went along.
I think structure, we had a good structure. I think we had the operating board, we had the statutory board, we had the operating board yeah. Where all the key decision makers, people who are heading the businesses, they were part of the operating board. And then we had a very important next level, which was the management council. We used to call it the MC. Every P&L owner was part of the management council that way. And every 6 months, the management council meets. Every 3 months, the operating board meets. So strategy and things like that, happens at that level. And any decisions like breaking it down and all that happens at the MC level. And we had another interesting level called the institutional members, IM we used to call it. And almost 200, maybe one fourth of the organization. Like people with a certain tenure and people who've done well in the organization, whichever service, whichever business, whichever location. We used to all meet once a year in either Chennai or Bangalore, the entire around 200, 220 people. And any big change, we used to call it any cataclysmic change in the organization will happen only at that level so that there's ownership, Congress seating or whatever. So that in a sense, it connotes equality that way. So nobody is an MD there or a director there. And we used to always have an external person who will come couple of them, anchor those sessions kind of a thing. Yeah, in my view, I think it helped us quite a bit. And there's so much of co-ownership in that sense.
But I think our greatest challenge was post-Randstad acquisition of Videon, where there were two companies in India which they were running and which got in a way merged with Papa. That was a challenge which I found personally to be the toughest challenge over the last 20 years, if you were to really take. Because they had grown with a certain culture. And they were large, significant. They brought in about 300 crores of revenue. And grouting that with us was a hell of a challenge in many, many, many ways. And I really think that was really the toughest challenge. Okay, so the challenge of being an entrepreneur, starting, growing, taking a certain scale level was nothing compared to two streams of companies coming in with their own identities, coming and merging at a certain point in time. I'll see that as the toughest challenge, which I think only partially we resolved, really speaking. And it was, in my view, responsible for very, very low profitability, which the company went through the last 2-3 years. Then, of course, by the time we had also started pulling out a little and all that. And though the number oneness remained, I think it remained with very, very low profitabilities and the portfolio balances, all that are very, very major challenges which remain today. Yeah.
Okay, let me just get a time check. How much time do we have? Okay, another 2 questions?
Yeah.
Okay. You've been investing in many startups yourself over the last few years. So how do you see today's entrepreneurs relative to the time when you got started, the pros and cons of what they're doing today?
We must have invested in some 12, 13 companies as of now, as angels or as early investors or whatever. AccessV is one such venture, which we did take an early position. And
which one?
AccessV Creators, okay. One of the TiE members, and e-learning. That's one of them who have now come to a stage they can seek funding independently and things like that. I've done about 12 odd investments, and I find, not necessarily in my investee companies, a fairly strong propensity to look at valuation a little too early, even before value gets crystallized in the company, to seek valuation, in my view. I see that as a tendency which always distinguishes. The moment I see that, I don't invest. It's a thing which, where you don't see that external investment as an add-on, but as a survival kind of a scene. I see that often happen. I see them come with a lot more confidence than probably what I used to see 10 years back, 20 years back. But I see them coming with a lot more short-term ideas. I hardly see them taking a horizon of 15, 20 years kind of a thing. It seems too long for many people. One twist in the story, let me get it right, get my valuation, move into the next level. I think there's far too many serial entrepreneurs like you who have inspired too heavily, people to, kind of do this in quick, short-term kind of things. I mean, not only you, Suresh.
The hangover of the .com, scenario when a lot of people made money in a very short period of time. The few who made money. Those who lost money are not remembered. But so
that's right. Somewhere I think I see that short-termishness, so to speak, a lot more dominant here in today's entrepreneurs. I'd like to see a lot more of somebody saying, look, over 10 years, I'd like this company to be like this. Even that seems a long time. That's my concern. My thrill is that, they are very, very assertive, today's entrepreneurs who come in. They actually exude a lot more clarity, and I see a lot more of gender balance, a lot more of women come in and be on their own and things like that. Though this combo doesn't seem to happen much. One of my regrets have been, this 24/7 husband and wife and partner and all that seems to scare away people. And still, looking for one couple to invest in. I'm not seeing them really. It's seems
Difficult.
no, no. But you're not coming into the investment scene, right? Oh, you are. Okay, let me see. Okay, that seems to be something which that's courage still doesn't seem to come. Courage to work with your spouse and all that and do business.
Is it a
That's
sort
my
of
one.
work-life balance challenge that people are not able to, come to terms with? You think?
No, I think it's the way many people construct the family and the workers, they are mutually exclusive.
Compartmentalized, yeah.
You need to have them mutually exclusive, and you'll bring work home kind of a thing, and worse still, you'll bring home to work and things like that. I think there's an assumption and a myth that you can keep your coat away kind of a thing. You can keep your home away when you come to work, and I think it's very Western in the thought, and in my view, can be relooked at. Honestly, I don't think there's any major hassle which has happened because of this, and I think it is a great feeling to, Lata always used to say, maybe we would have fallen apart but for MAFA. Oftentimes MAFA is the integrative force which kept these two fairly different personalities together.
What was your view of this?
No, this mainly because I do say that, and that's because I think with the kind of pressure we used to have in the initial days, setting up, traveling, he used to be really traveling 25 days a month, and I used to be doing maybe 10 days a month and things like that. So I used to always feel like, though, I used to come in the morning, go in the evening kind of a thing. So since I was there within the system, I could really understand. And even though we fight and all that, ultimately we all know, both of us knew what the larger perspective was and what we were working towards as a goal. So I think in that sense it helped being together. But I think, we need to have our boundaries. We need to have space for each other that way. So I think those are important in that sense. And to me, actually, entrepreneurship, it's given me mental flexibility. Though, whether it's, for me, office has also been a home kind of a thing. So, there's never been a constraint for me in that way. So that has really helped. As such, I used to take my daughter to the office, or son when he was born to the office. Right on the 30th day after my son was born, I was in office along with him kind of a thing. So it was almost like a family, both the families, at home or in office. I never saw a difference that way. So it was so much of comfort mentally that way. So that helped a lot.
Okay. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about was your interest in politics. So you talked about it from about 2004 or so. You were already contemplating, getting into politics.
Yeah. So
what was the idea there? What is the opportunity you see there?
See, I've always been interested in public life. Okay. Way back when I was in engineering, I was part of the Janata Party. I was translating George Fernandez's speech. We all used to jump with joy. 1977, Indira Gandhi got defeated. Sanjay Gandhi got defeated by Ravindra Verma, unknown lawyer. I was very, very, I've canvassed for Sridevi's Chittappa in the Sivagasi constituency, which Janata Party won in 1977. One of the assembly seats they won and all that. So I used to be very intensely, I used to be in college politics. I got elected as General Secretary and all that. Yeah, but for a while after that, it was very intellectual. It was not really coming out, and it was always wanting to find expression. And so that's a very emotional thing. Cognitively, I can say, you can do many things in politics, and whatever do in your business world, if you can do many times more if you are able to make one impact. Like the last assembly speech when I spoke about disinvestment by the state government. If only CM had just listened to it a little bit, today Tamil Nadu would have been, having lesser loans to the extent of 10,000 crores, which they could, for instance. I think we have made an impact, even as an opposition MLA, whatever I have been able to do. I don't think as a pure industry person, I would have done it in many, many manners. And imagine what it could be if one way to be part of the central government. And many things happen in this world which lead to different possibilities. For instance, in the last parliament election, when I first ran and all that, it was quite possible if things had taken a turn that you could have landed in a ministry somewhere, at that point. So those possibilities, in my view, is the excitement in politics, in my view. So I think public life allows you a certain scope and a scale which business will never allow you to. That's my honest belief. And so that's the interest. But at the same time, my primary identity is that of an entrepreneur. Primary identity is of that of an institution builder.
But now you could be a political entrepreneur of sorts, I guess.
All politicians are entrepreneurs. I mean, I don't see any distinction. You may have a good entrepreneur, bad entrepreneur, as you have in the entrepreneurial world. But I think it's you have good politicians.
But it's very rare for people who are successful in business to contemplate a transition to politics. Now, what would you have to say to people who are thinking of it and people who are not? Both of them.
You can blend. I see, again, this whole business like home and work. I think we tend to have many boundaries where none need to exist, really. I don't think heavens have fallen because I was in politics. I don't think it's hurt my company. I don't think it's hurt us personally. Yeah, it's fine. I have a great leader who allows you certain space, as she calls. Okay, not all leaders will allow you to do that. But choose your leader. Yeah, it's okay. I mean, maybe in most other parties, I wouldn't have had the kind of freedom as I've had here. That part I would surely say. So, I think you have a choice. Always. You can build your own party. I mean, there are enough people in the country who are one MP operations or one MLA operation who are still making a difference. I mean, you have Thirumavalavan, who's one MP and he's able to make some difference. Yeah. I think, in my view, it's a mind block which you need to resolve. It's okay. There are options for you. If you want to take a plunge into politics or whatever, you can be full-time in politics, you can be in business, you can be part of it. Today, I think the greatest challenge in my life we're undertaking today, to rebuild the whole MAFA version 6 or whatever, to actually build a big 5 consulting company out of India, which is what we are taking when I'm 52 and she's 46 and 46 and a half, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, 46 and a half. So, no, that's a very major concern. That's a major concern. So, okay, so I am taking on and I think it's okay. I think I'm not able to see beyond the 10 years kind of a thing. But in a 10-year period, I can see very well what we can do with the whole thing. And if, a God-given opportunity comes and I do make it to a higher level in politics, it's fine. There's a dream which will run here. And I don't see no reason why I can't go hold both at this point in time.
Okay. Now, you've also been active in terms of being in terms of running microfinance and self-help groups and things like that. So what was the idea there, and what do you actually mean by the term social venture? That's a much bandied term with different connotations. So I'd like to hear your view.
We started a trust in '96, actually, in the name of his grandmother who brought him up, Swarnamal Education Trust. Initially with the idea of supporting children in his village, where this match factory, children used to be there. So we understood the village and the children, so we used to go there very often, support them, and so it started with 10 children, then it moved to 20, then 50, then 100. So almost every 2 months we used to go there also, teach those kids. We used to like it. It so happened that 2000 we took over a school here in Ayanavaram. It's called now Swarnamal Matriculation School. So it's mostly underprivileged children. And so from then, actually we have no background of academics or anything like that. But it so happened that that school, like most of the children were underprivileged. And we said so it was appealing to us to really. So then we took that over and we found that many of the kids were studying. The parents used to be around, the women used to say help us to start something. And we would like to pay the fees out of that. That is how we started the self-help groups. As such in Ayanavaram we started. And slowly, like, this thing just caught on, and there's so many women started coming. So we used to give them a little bit of money, seed capital, some kind of vegetable selling or flower selling, all these kind of things they used to do. And it used to be very interesting that way, and they used to really repay the money that way. So that's how this self-help group started. And yeah, it just grew, and it also, pulled us in, and it gave us so much of satisfaction, because at the grassroots level, we used to see a change. And, those kids studying in the school, and then we started the Marfa Foundation. Just 5 years back, we thought, like, more of our members can take part in it, rather than just the two of us. So then we started the Marfa Foundation, and many of our members then started taking interest in that. And today we have almost 4,000 children.
When you say members, you're talking about
employees.
Employees.
We call
this employee term is
we call them
taboo.
members. We don't use the term employee in Marfa, because in somewhere, like, we thought employee connotes a very transient relationship, whereas membership is more permanent. So that's why wherever, even today, Marfa member, even if he or she is not in the company, we always call them he or she is a Marfa member in that way. So many of them started taking interest. So today we have almost 4,000 children. We also support people in his district, Madurai district, like
Madurai,
Virudhunagar and all that. That's another great thing, because we really see a change at the rural level, the schools, the rural schools and all that. So we have almost 60,000 women now between Chennai and Virudhunagar, Madurai districts. And many of them, almost 60 to 65% of them are doing some kind of job or the other. That way, tailoring or selling or creche they run, canteens they run, kind of. So we give them training and all that. And yeah, by and large, we were using our personal funds. Whatever we used to earn, we used to put it into the trust, and we used to really use that. And then last year we decided that this can't go on. Any NGO to be sustainable, you need to have some activity which has to sustain it. That's when we really got this NBFC license, and we got into this microfinance, which is very recent that way. So this thing, like, our entire thing is a very holistic model, where we have education, healthcare, and livelihood creation.
But we've been able to save the lives of over 3,000 children through this Ekam Foundation, which we, of course, helped to create. So Dr. Sai Lakshmi.
So we have a Marfa Foundation, which focuses on education now. We have Ekam, which focuses on healthcare, and we have Swarnam Trust, which focuses on livelihood generation.
Yeah.
So all three work together, support each other. So in a sense, it's a very holistic model. Like, we have around 1,300 widows, and all their children we support that way. So now it's 6 years, and we've seen some of our children have picked up jobs today. So right from 8th standard onwards, we pick them up. From the corporation schools, we have classes for them, skill building workshops for them every weekend. And right today, like, almost 140 of them have picked up jobs that way. And we can really see a change in that family, the women, their families as such.
Okay. And the NBFC license, that's a company that you have
incorporated? Yeah, it's called Varam.
Bought over an NBFC.
We bought over an NBFC. It's called Varam, basically.
Okay. Yeah.
Under the brand name of Varam, we're doing this microfinance.
Okay.
So it's just new, honestly, just
we also
7 months.
set up these kiosks you may see in front of these departmental stores, Varam Retail, Varam coffee shops are getting created as one of the
microfinance
front-end
activities.
Yeah, where the women can work and earn some money, kind of things.
Okay.
But it's a great field to take an area, focus on that area, develop all these three aspects, education, health, and livelihood. Our own dream was to actually make an impact on the human development index in that particular place. Unfortunately, we realize even the data generation we'll need to do. Right now, the kind of intense data you will need constituency-wise or district-wise, it's not available very easily, which one of the institutes here are doing currently. We intend to do a lot more of it in our own activity now.
Yeah. Okay.